Hello, my fellow Hizzers, and welcome back to the channel. This is the Hiz on Real Estate. My name is Hank, and this is a channel devoted to talking to you about the ins and outs of real estate investment. On today's show, we're going to be talking about how to find the right place for you for your short-term rental. There are a lot of different factors involved, and we're going to cover all of them. So let's get to it. All right, so on today's show, we're going to be talking about how to find the right place for your next short-term rental. And it just so happens that I'm actually looking to get another short-term rental right now. So I'm actually thinking about this question for myself. So today I made a list of key elements that I want when I'm looking into a particular market for a short-term rental. So there are several factors here that I want to talk about. The first that was on the top of my mind is relatively low taxes. Now, you're going to certainly get different varying tax rates as you go from state to state. Some have very high tax rates that you'll be paying on your short-term rental. Others have relatively low. Some, like Tennessee or in some instances Florida or Texas, have absolutely no income tax. And so tax is a really important thing, something that if you don't consider can really bite you in the behind later on. And so I want a state that has relatively friendly tax rates. For example, my other short-term rental, which is in North Carolina's rate is approximately 4 3/4, which isn't too bad. Maryland isn't too bad as well. It's about the same at about 4.75. Tennessee doesn't, in some circumstances, and Florida and Texas don't have any income tax that applies to the short-term rental. So this is definitely something you're going to want to check out. There are resources online that list state by state what the income tax applicable to short-term rental properties are in various states. And so you're going to want to do a little bit of research and figure out which are the most tax-friendly states, if that's important to you. I think that's a really important characteristic of a short-term rental property area, and so that's one of the first things that I look for. The second thing that I look for is an established vacation location, and what I mean by that is somewhere where you know people have been traveling to for decades with their family to go on vacation. You want to feel safe in your investment, especially if this is somewhere where the short-term rental, you really couldn't turn it into a regular long-term rental if the vacation trend kind of dried up and you couldn't switch over. You don't want to be sitting there with an unoccupied short-term rental just burning through your cash. So you might think about areas like the Outer Banks where people go all the time and you know there's going to be a very high occupancy rate at least through the season. You might look to areas like around Disney World or Disneyland. You might look to cities, although right now, given what COVID is doing to kind of the tourism industry, people are looking at less dense areas. So I'm kind of shying away from a short-term rental in a city location. But you might look towards state parks or national parks, places like Yellowstone or the Smoky Mountains. Gatlinburg and Pigeon Forge, for example, are really popular areas around the Smoky Mountains, and those are places where people have gone for decades. I typically want to try to stay away from trendier areas because while that can work in the short term, it may not work in the long term. Once the trend or the fad is gone, you may be stuck with a house, whatever it is, 5 years into the investment, unoccupied. And so I want to find a place where I know people have been going for decades and are likely to keep going for decades. I want to find an area also with a lot of things to do nearby. So while you could get a house, tucked away in the mountains somewhere where someone might go for, I don't know, a couple days just to get some peace and quiet, well, that's all well and good. Chances are you're going to have more success with a house that is also located around a lot of things to do, especially if you're looking towards hosting full families as opposed to just, a couple. So you may look towards, things to do like go-karts and ice cream and theme parks and, again, going back to Pigeon Forge and Gatlinburg, there's Dollywood right there. and Gatlinburg and Pigeon Forge have their own sets of activities. Anakista is right in Gatlinburg. So Smoky Mountains, it's a national park right there. A lot of hiking and biking and trails and water activities. And so you know that there's going to be a lot of things to do, a big draw. The other thing that I like to look for, which we'll talk about in a second, but is related to this, is a location that can rent all year round. Now, you don't necessarily have to follow that. For example, my short-term rental right now is in the Outer Banks, and we really don't even rent it in the fall and winter seasons because we make a whole season's worth of money or a whole year's worth of money in just the prime season. But it's even better for purposes of security, diversification, continued occupancy, and so forth, if you can find a place that has both summer and winter activities. So if you can find a place specifically around like a lake area that has both skiing in the winter and then it has water sports in the summer, that is, in my mind, an ideal location, because even if one of the seasons is slow, the other season might pick it up and you have continued regular occupancy throughout the full year. It gives you a little bit more security. The other factor that I look to is not a lot of hotels nearby. So if you know that a lot of people are going to a specific area and there's lots of things to do, lots of people are going to be coming there, but there are not a lot of hotel rooms there, they're going to be looking for places to stay, and you know that. Certain areas, people love to get cabins specifically rather than hotel rooms, or log houses, things like that. Or you're seeing more trends like tiny houses or even RVs and things like that. So people are looking for a specific type of place to stay. But even in areas where they might just as soon stay in a hotel room, if there aren't those hotels to be offered, you know that your house is going to be more desired and there's going to be a higher occupancy rate, or at least chances are that there's going to be a greater demand and a greater occupancy rate for your place. So again, a little bit more security in places where people are going to be coming, but there's not a ton of hotel rooms to serve them. I also like a place that generally has a low cost of living. So you could go, for example, and you could try to find a place in Chicago or Washington, D.C. or Los Angeles or another metro area, but those areas tend to be very expensive. So whether you're looking for a property manager to help you out, or you're going to self-manage, but you need to have a team on the ground of contractors and cleaners and people to provide you with basic services to help you with your property. All those things are going to be much more expensive if you go to a more expensive place, obviously, and you might not get rents that justify that greater expense. It really may squeeze your ability to profit on that property. So I like to try to find places that are in high demand, where you're going to get high occupancy and a fair rental rate, but where the cost of living is relatively low. You generally find that in more rural or mountain areas. And so, the people that are going to serve the property, whether that is a property manager or whether that is a team of contractors and service people, all of those rates are just going to be a little bit less, maybe allowing you to profit just a little bit more. It just makes life a little bit easier and less expensive if you can find a place that has low cost of living rather than you're getting squeezed at every turn. The other thing that I look into related to that last point of low cost of living is, what are the property management rates in various areas? Now, there can be a lot of catches to this. For example, a lot of property managers will charge a lower percentage on the front end, but then charge a lot of fees on the back end, whether it's to the renters or to the owners or to maybe even both parties. And so what looks like maybe a 12 or 15% rental rate, it really amounts to 19 or 20% after they get all their fees on the front and back end. But generally speaking, I like to look at markets, and I like to look to see what the typical property management rates are in those markets. So for example, if you go to Gatlinburg or Pigeon Forge, which is an area where I've looked, property management rates there get around 20 or 30%, which is really high, sometimes even higher, like 35%. As opposed to that, if you're looking at like the Outer Banks, for example, property management rates are more like 15 to 19%. So again, depending on the fees that are built in or not built in, property management fees can really eat into your profit line. And so you have to, if you're going to pursue the property management approach, you really have to be careful with what is the percentage that I'm going to be losing on that money coming in that's going to be going to the property manager. Property managers serve an important role, but you don't necessarily want to overpay or cause your numbers just not to work because you're paying so much for property management. The other thing that I look to is I like a property ideally that's within a car ride. Now, Outer Banks from where I live is about 6 or 7 hours, which is probably the max. That's probably maybe a little bit more than you'd like to go. Ideally, it would be within 2 or 3 hours of where you live. So it would be an area that's far enough that you don't necessarily feel obligated to be there doing the work yourself all the time and being the handyman and so forth. But it is a place that's close enough that you can go there for a weekend, enjoy the property yourself, or even do some handyman projects on a weekend just to get away or something at your leisure. But you definitely don't want that feeling of, well, the house is in my backyard, something needs fixed, I can just roll over there right away. And all of a sudden you find yourself, you're constantly at the house doing work, which is really not the point of a short-term rental investment. So you want to be able to use your people, you want to do it smartly, but you also want to be able to potentially enjoy the property and be generally accessible to the property should the worst emergency or something else happen and you can get there fast. A very important rule, a factor that you want to look into, especially if you're going to go the Airbnb or VRBO route, is short-term rental prohibitions or limitations or laws in particular areas. For example, I know that Gatlinburg in certain areas has specific limitations related to short-term rentals. And so you don't want to end up buying a property for purposes of short-term rental and then find out after you've purchased the property that you're actually not allowed to use it as a short-term rental. So you need to be very careful about that. Look into the rules and regulations. Talk to your realtor before you actually put the money down and sign on the dotted line, because that can be a really big boo-boo. Now, this is especially important during COVID times or times where we have health issues. The trend that we're seeing right now is people want less dense populations, less city populations, more nature, open air, fresh air type of areas. So now, although that is a trend, I think that's something that can generally hold for a long period of time. That's not something that is just going to last a couple years. People have been going to these areas, lake areas, mountain areas, for a long time. It's just more people are going to them now. And so something that's going to remain in demand, but it's something to think about if you're about to buy a short-term property. This COVID pandemic, we don't know how long it could go on for. And if you sink your money into something in a dense population right now, there's no telling on how long this is going to last and how long you're going to have carry costs without actually anyone in the property occupying and paying rent and supporting your mortgage. So if it were me, and in this case it actually is, I'm going to be looking for something that is in a less densely populated area with a lot of fresh air and nature and things to do outside. And the last factor is somewhat tied to some things we've talked about before, but you generally want to pick an area and do your due diligence to figure out what areas have reliable and sufficient supply of contractors to help you with your house, especially if you do the Airbnb or VRBO route and you're self-managing. For example, I know in the Outer Banks, there are no contractors down there. It's incredibly difficult to even get a handyman to do a quick fix on your house down there, to the point where I've had contractors from up north in my area actually go all the way down to the house to work on the house because we just couldn't find many people that were good, or the people that are good down there just aren't generally available because they're in such demand because there's so many houses and so few contractors. So do a little due diligence, do a little digging before you end up picking an area, and figure out, get a feel for what the contractor situation is like. Talk to other homeowners and see what their experience has been in getting people to help them with their house. That's one area that especially, like I say, if you're going to self-manage, you really want to have a good feel for that before you pick a particular area. So those are all the factors that I look into when I'm picking a particular area. Now, like I said, I'm actually in the market for another short-term rental at this point. So I'm going to be looking at these factors to help me determine where I want to go. Based on these factors, I think I'm going to be picking an area that likely has 2 seasons, so likely has a lake property near winter skiing and winter sports. An area that has generally low cost of living and generally low taxes, and an area where there are reliable contractors, relatively less expensive property managers, and the cost of living is relatively low, and something that's within a car ride from me. Again, my property down in the Outer Banks is 6 or 7 hours. I'm probably going to find an area around me that's less distance away, maybe more in the 2 to 4 hour range. So we'll see what I come up with. I'm going to do some research. We'll have another show where I look around and show you some of the resources that I found online to help me find the right area to go to. But that will be on future shows. I hope this show was really helpful for you and you got some good information out of it, some helpful information. If you liked the content of the show, please click the like button below. And if you like the content of the channel, please subscribe. It can really help out the channel and keep me going on these videos. I'm glad that you tuned in today. Happy to have had you and great to see you.